Well, it has been a bit of a bumpy ride, but we have gotten to the finale of Amazon Prime's The Peripheral. I went into this show with hope that it would be good, but not the expectation that it would be. After all, I had just finished watching Amazon Prime blow $1 billion to absolutely butcher J.R.R. Tolkien with the amateur hour they called The Rings of Power, wherein I found not a single redeeming character or storyline. By the end, even the two decent characters they had managed to write, Durin and Disa, were squandered in revolutionary nonsense and a mithril storyline so bafflingly imbecilic, I could very well believe the writers had a massive stroke in the creative section of their brains when they came up with it. The creative bankruptcy of that entire enterprise, from pre-production all the way through shooting, post-production, and pre-release marketing, and on to post-finale ass-covering was truly astounding. Not a single point in that process worked. So you can imagine my skepticism of Amazon taking another literary property in the sci-fi fantasy genre and adapting it. Unlike Rings, however, the trailer for The Peripheral was compelling, drawing me into what looked like an interesting show with a cast, for the most part, that looked like it might work. And the first episode gave hints of that. I enjoyed the first episode, minor issues with a scene or two aside. The second episode was not bad, but we were hitting a downward trend. By episode 4, I was concerned. Little of import had happened or been revealed, and the Rings of Power had a similar storyline trajectory. And episodes 5 and 6 had me dreading where this show would wind up, because it was trending towards dumpster fire. The actor playing the inspector did not help with that, with the ridiculous overacting, crap dialogue, and bizarre facial expressions tossed around like confetti in a parade. It was a show that was wildly misusing Chloe Grace Moretz, an actress I have liked in a bunch of projects, Kick-Ass in the first Equalizer film, just to name a couple. I came to really enjoy the actors playing Connor, Lev, Burton, and Billy Ann as well. It was starting to depress me as we neared the finale. Episode 7 was a little bit of a pickup, but the last episode had a lot riding on it in my mind. So, how did it do? Welcome to the Peripheral Episode 8 spoiler review, wherein which I will enlighten you as to how this final show of the season struck me. We start off in 2028 at Walter Reed Medical Center, where Connor is being visited by Flynn after his run-in with the explosive dog. He starts to wax philosophical about life and wishing it was like Sims that Flynn was so good at. He says he wishes he could just start that section of his life over so he could shoot the dog instead. At the time, I had no idea why they put this scene in. By the end of the show, I realized it was a clumsy bit of foreshadowing that was more than a little unnecessary. Then we head to Pickett's house, post-Deputy Dumbass murder spree. Deputy Dumbass comes out of the house and gets into his SUV. He puts the hitman's gun back into the evidence bag, has a short think, and then calls in the scene in the calmest voice you have heard from him in this entire show thus far. Which is more than slightly weird, since he is supposedly calling in the murder of Pickett, his wife, and the sheriff. You know, the sheriff and Pickett. His boss and the small town's major patron. The guy who basically owns anybody of any consequence in their neck of the woods. So if they listen to the tape of him calling it in later, isn't it going to be a mite suspicious that he was so calmly cold-blooded about it? And it is only after everybody descends on the property to start the investigation that he realizes he has blood on his boot. Deputy Dumbass is wiping it off on the bumper of his SUV when a state trooper comes to inform him that they have a pulse on Pickett. You know, the guy who witnessed him assassinate the sheriff and attempt to do the same thing to Pickett himself. This clown never even bothered to do the minimum a cop would when seeing dead bodies on the floor in the mansion of the town's patron, i.e. check for a frickin' pulse. Shortly after he watches the EMTs treating Pickett, they get a call about the shooting at the clinic where Doc Didi works. Deputy Dumbass drives up and Doc Didi runs to hug him as she asks about Pickett's house and whether it was the hitman who did that too. Waiting way too long, he then nods after she repeats the question. We jump to a meeting between the inspector and the three peripherals. She was told about the hitman and she asks if they know it won't be the last. She proposes an alliance between her and Flynn's group, saying that Flynn can do things in the future that she cannot, while she and the Met have resources that could help Flynn's group. She wants to investigate Boss Lady and offers to help avert the jackpot in Flynn's timeline. The inspector then asks what Flynn wants in return for helping her, and she says she wants her mother healed. After consulting the computers, the inspector informs her that there is nothing that can be done. Mom has about 23 days left to live. Flynn drops out of her peripheral and Burton says they will go talk to her. That night, Mom and Flynn are on the porch after they let Mom know there is no more hope. Mom smiles and what follows was both retarded and predictable. It's basically an affirmation of Super Flynn and Burton the up. Mom tells Flynn that when she was first diagnosed, she thought it wouldn't be so bad. That Flynn could live her life now that she was not going to be there. Flynn tells her mother that she is living the life she wanted. Mom tells her that she knows that, but that Flynn is so awesome that she was keeping the family afloat, and that she deserved more, that she could be more. They do a brief, very brief, reminiscence about Dad before Mom makes Flynn promise that she will grow into what she is meant to be when Mom finally shuffles off the mortal coil. Back in the future, Boss Lady is meeting Ash in the park. Ash offers her the info being stored in Flynn's brain and wants away from Lev. They discuss the inspector and how she will not stop investigating, but will also not be able to stop Lev. Boss Lady shows a hint of aggravation, saying that she will have to go further than she wanted to in order to counter Lev. She then asks what Ash wants in return for helping R.I. Ash smiles and says she wants Lev killed, and they show a flashback to Lev cutting Ossian in the last episode. Boss Lady is surprised and asks if she would be willing to help in gaining access to Lev in order to do it. Ash agrees and asks what she meant by going further than she wanted to. Boss Lady smiles grimly and says she will have to drastically alter the past stub to save their project, sacrificing years of research and even destroying the stub world if need be. When Flynn returns to her peripheral, she finds herself sitting on a bench by the river with Wilf. He apologizes for overpromising their ability to heal her mother. Flynn asks if he thinks they could still find Alita, and Wilf says she must be dead. He then talks about his childhood with Alita, that she told him he had a home before, but that he could not remember. All he could remember before being adopted was living in the camps and on the streets. He and Alita ran away from home 8 months after being adopted, which Alita preferred because they were free. She gave that up for him because he got sick, and to save him she had to take them both back to their adoptive parents. He then tells Flynn that the inspector wanted him to talk to her about the proposal, but he is hesitant to give her his real thoughts on the matter because they could be overheard, certainly by the inspector if nobody else. Flynn suggests linking again so she can feel what he feels about what she asks, allowing him to transmit his real meanings through feelings. Through this, she learns he is falling in love with her. And during that, somehow, Flynn magically discovers where Alita must be hiding, their secret home on the streets after they ran away from their adoptive home. Meanwhile, Ossian and Ash are monitoring them, and Ossian asks Ash if they should call Lev to inform him. Ash smiles vindictively and says no. They serve a new master now. Flynn and Will find a young Alita, the one from the first episode and now obviously a Peripheral, in a park that now covers where the younger Alita and Wilf lived together. Alita tells Wilf she will guide him to where she is, but pulls a gun on Flynn when he tries to bring her as well. She reminds him that Flynn doesn't only see with her own eyes. Ash sees through Flynn's eyes as well. Flynn leaves the Peripheral when Wilf tells her to go home, promising to tell her everything when they see each other again. Young Alita then takes him to the site where the camp he lived in used to be. They are joined by the real Alita and some of her Confederates. Wilf tells her that he does not remember the site, and she mocks him, saying he was 7 at the time and should remember. She tells him the reason he can't is because the implant everyone has in their heads. It's supposed to help with immunity and various other things, but Alita insists that it is also so they can make the people forget inconvenient facts, like Lev's family and their allies killing 5 million people in a fortnight in an effort to stop a plague. In fact, she has young Alita dig in the field they stand in, and she comes up with a skull. Alita says it is proof that the oligarchs and RI need to be punished for what they have done, that they need to be brought down. And to do that, Alita wants the information she stole from RI and stored in Flynn's brain. They show a very brief shot of Pickett in a hospital bed, unconscious, before going to the bar where Jasper is drinking with Pickett's thugs. They get to arguing over who will take over Pickett's businesses, and Jasper puts his hat in the ring when one of them suggests a power-sharing arrangement, like the Romans had between generals. The thugs laugh and send him for more beer. Later, they are in Jasper's SUV to go home when one of them vomits in the back seat, sending them all into hysterics again. They all pass out as Jasper drives them home. He is near some railroad tracks when he asks them who gets dropped off first. When none of them answers, he gets a look on his face. It is probably supposed to be cunning, but it really just looks like constipation. He stops the SUV on the tracks and gets out. He goes into the trees a little way beyond the tracks and calls Billy Ann, his wife. He talks about playing a game of Monopoly with Flynn and Burton, a story that emphasizes he was a spineless boob way back, and Billy Ann tries to convince him she married him because he was a kind man. She asks him if he is alright, and he tells her that he just called because he was about to make a big mistake, and talking to her seemed to talk him out of it. He hangs up and goes to move the SUV when he realizes he locked the key fob in the vehicle. The train is coming, and he tries to wake up the guys inside while smashing at the rather sturdy windows. When he realizes he can't get in or wake them, he runs for the trees again. The thugs wake up just in time to see the train coming at them, destroying the SUV. The next morning, Flynn is riding her bike along a forest road when she runs into a parked deputy dumbass. When she stops, he asks her if she and Burton are involved in a right-wing militia group. And of course, it's always a right-wing militia group for Hollywood that Homeland Security just alerted law enforcement about. That there is intelligence that the group is planning on blowing up a missile silo not far from their town. She assures Deputy Dumbass that they are not involved in anything like that, before turning around and hightailing it out of there. She heads back to the future where she finds Ash, asking where Wilf is. She tells Ash about the silo plan and sees Ash already knows about it. She asks Ash if she's still on their side. Ash tells her about the information Alita stored in Flynn's brain, and that is information from RI that RI wants back, or destroyed. Flynn summons Connor and tells him about the silo plan. She talks about how sometimes in Sims you make a mistake very early on in the game, and no matter what else you do later on, the mistake dooms you to failure. Then she tells him she wants to reboot the stub to allow her to go back and make better decisions in opposing Boss Lady and those trying to manipulate her. And that was the point where I began doubting how they were finishing this season. There seems to me to be a hole or two in the logic train of the writing of this one, and I am pretty sure they are ignoring a paradox or three that they are creating with this. It will be interesting to see how they explain the mechanics of this, or if they are just going to bluff their asses off and not explain anything. By the way, Amazon, if it is the latter, you might want to suggest that their colleagues over at the Rings of Power employ a similar tactic and write Season 1 out of existence. Anyway, Flynn then goes to the inspector for help. The inspector tells her about how RI has secret stub sites that they guard with enhanced peripherals. Flynn gets there and is approached by a gardener. She easily kicks his ass and uses his eye to open the door before breaking his neck. Inside, she finds half a dozen guard peripherals in a stone room that looks like a medieval armory. She quickly and fairly easily kills or disables all of the guards before going to the pocket watch sitting on a stone pedestal with a touchscreen in the middle. She sets up her own stub, taunting Boss Lady, who is using one of the beaten guards to talk to her, before destroying the pocket watch that seems to serve as the key to the stub. The screen goes blank and Flynn smiles. We are then treated to a flashback of the scene where she was talking to Connor and explaining her plan. Apparently there was more to that conversation, and for some reason they decided to break it up. She's convincing him to help her with the plan, but leave Burton out of it. She's going to set things up so that Connor can seem like he is out to help Boss Lady, so she can have someone in the enemy camp as she tries to redo the events that have already occurred, only with more favorable outcomes. Then we see Flynn walking along a country road. She stops, smiles, and we see Connor with a sniper rifle a long way off. We get flashbacks of scenes from the first season of the show before they zoom out to show the beautiful countryside. Then there is a shot echoing through the hills. Flynn comes to in her peripheral, sitting opposite the inspector at a table in a public square, who smiles and asks her if they should get to work. If you are patient enough to watch all the way through the credits, there is an end credits scene. Damn you, Marvel. Lev and his wife get out of a car and go into a private club for oligarchs. They are there to have lunch with his father and mother, and when they get into the club's dining room, the pair stop. At the table he was expecting his father at are sitting 3 older men. His wife asks him what he did wrong, and he assures her he did nothing wrong. She air kisses his cheek and leaves him to talk to them. When he gets to the table, the men tell him that his father sent them to talk to him since he was feeling unwell. They tell him that anything that threatens their position is not permitted. He explains that his shenanigans with RI were harmless and well within the bounds to protect the family and seek opportunity to make money. He then apologizes if anything he did harmed the family standings. They look at him solemnly for a long minute before laughing and saying he should see his face. They then tell him that his RI operation is causing trouble and that it needs to stop. He needs to prune everything and everyone that leads back to him. Everyone. Then they wonder where the waiter is so they can eat. And that ends the first season of Amazon Prime's The Peripheral. My thoughts? They're a bit all over the place. This was a bit of a seesaw season. It started good, went down in the middle with a few pretty bad episodes, and then saw a rise at the end. The finale was also a mixed bag. The pacing was good, and the annoying characters were mostly limited to brief scenes. The story itself has issues, not the least of which are those paradoxes I mentioned at the beginning. Depending on how, or if, they explain the solution Flynn comes up with, It leaves holes in a plot that is already plagued with issues. Without rehashing the whole season's worth of issues, let's just count out the ones this episode featured. First, there is Deputy Dumbass. He is a walking, talking issue all by himself. While not the worst character on the show, he probably came in second without much competition from the third place contenders. The actor can't seem to find any other expression to put on his face other than slight variations of dumbass. Confused dumbass, earnest dumbass, angry dumbass, loving dumbass. That last one is particularly hard to spot from his regular old dumbass. And sometimes the only way you know is using context of the scene he is in. I in no way, shape, or form believe loving dumbass when he was talking to the woman he is going to marry right before he kissed her. Not only is his acting terrible, but his part is not written particularly well either. There's a bumbling quality about his character that can't solely be foisted off on the actor. And from the context of the show, a 10-year veteran of any police force should not be that bumbling. I don't care how rural and lazy the town is. He is also more than a little retarded, as the post-murder scene actions of the character showed. He walks out of a murder scene that he is going to try and get away with, calls all of his colleagues within range, and then walks around with blood on his boots? Seriously? But if Deputy Dumbass is the second worst character, the worst is his colleague in the future, Inspector Lowbeer. I usually just say Inspector because I can't take the name Lowbeer seriously in combination with this character. The actor plays the character ridiculously overacted, and with an arrogance and a flamboyance of manner that grates. And very little that the inspector does seems to justify such arrogance. We are simply told that inspectors are superhuman and should be treated like immortals come down to dispense wisdom and justice to all. Unlike Deputy Dumbass, the character at least has range, but it is an annoying range that wins her the prize of most annoying character in the show, even though they only introduced the character in episode 6. I also had a problem with the whole mom storyline. While I understand why the writer/author included it, it seems like a waste of time. Flynn and Burton were already interested in helping Alita, and then Wilf and Lev. Including a storyline where they help cure Mom for about 3 episodes before jerking the rug out and giving her only 23 days to live is a little much. Especially if it is meant to be heart-wrenching. It isn't. And it probably won't be when she actually dies next season. Why? Because there really has not been any setup with the character of Mom. All we know is she is Flynn and Burton's mom and she is sick. We have had no character development to invest us, the audience, in the character of Mom. So when she is sentenced to die in 23 days, there is little emotional impact to that. Especially when the sum total of the emotional impact on the characters who should care is Flynn bouncing out of her peripheral and a weirdly written heart-to-heart between Flynn and Mom where it turns into a Flynn is awesome pep rally. Boss Lady has also been less than an impressive character. I can't tell if it's the actress or the writing with her. Some of it is the ridiculous facial expressions she does, expressions that compete with the inspector in their retardedness. While the character makes a good villain, there's something about her that leaves me wanting. She has amply demonstrated her villainy in the season, but then she fails to address enemies in a timely manner, thereby preventing the need for more catastrophic action later. As she mentions to Ash in the finale, she has been forced into doing things she would rather not, because she did not take her villainy to the next logical step. namely, killing Lev and all of his people. She had no problem killing the RI scientist that gave Elita information on the stub research, or sending hitmen back to kill Flynn and her entire family. But somehow she fails to kill those who actually are responsible for funding the heist on RI? I know there is supposed to be some kind of balance between RI, the oligarchs, and the Met, but there has not been a good enough explanation of that balance to satisfy me that Boss Lady could not both take out Lev and defend the RI from retaliation. After all, she should have no problem deploying the same threat she used against Lev against the entirety of the oligarchy if need be. There either needs to be more explicit explanation of the triumvirate they function in, and yes, more explicit than Boss Lady playing with toast, or she needed to be far more ruthless than she was towards those she perceived to be enemies. The budding romance between Flynn and Wilf is also a problem. They are separated by a time-space puzzle that cannot be resolved in their favor. So why write it? I doubt the future has a problem with sex bots, given the population issues and the technology available. However, Flynn is a country girl from backwoods Appalachia. That is a bridge too far to be believable that she would entertain a relationship via sex bot. A minor point, but one which they made more prominent in this episode with the scene by the river. And while I know there is ample reason for a rebellion by Ossian and Ash against Lev due to the events of episode 7, the attempted revolt in that episode kinda came out of nowhere. There was not real build-up to explain why his minions were trying to stab him in the back, and more specifically, why Ash was trying to give/sell the info in Flynn's brain to the Neoprims in order to burn their world down. Ossian's background in particular, vague though it has been hinted at, would probably make him less than likely to go along with a plan that would involve betraying the person who lifted him out of criminality. Little about that situation tracks with what has been shown so far. When they finally do find Elita, the storyline makes a rather abrupt turn as we finally, I assume, find out who the Neoprims are and what their deal is. And it is interesting, in a way that the middle episodes were not. I almost wish the series was about Elita. From living on the streets as a kid with Wilf and being adopted into the hoity-toity, to being hired by Wilf for Lev to infiltrate RI and steal stub tech, to betraying him and going underground with the Neoprims, and finding out what the implants really do. All of it makes a much more compelling story than the one we have been told by Amazon Prime. And the actress who plays Elita grabs your attention the minute she steps on screen. There's just something about her that screams, "Here is someone interesting doing interesting things." From there, we go to someone who was slightly interesting in the first episode he was in, to being another wasted character by this episode, namely Corbel Pickett. Perhaps with the ditzy wife out of the way, he will be interesting again, but I doubt it. The more he was on screen, the less interesting he was. And that was punctuated this episode by his appearing prone and unconscious the entire 2 scenes and minute and a half or so they showed him. The guy playing his nephew is either killing it as king of the cucks, or the showrunner and or writers have him acting as such. He is a most unimpressive character, and this trip over into triple murder was a bit abrupt. He has probably been a beta his whole life, and yet he suddenly decides to whack his uncle's lieutenants in a fit of ambition? Not sure I buy that, but okay. The whole deputy dumbass suspecting Flynn and Burton of being a right-wing militia and planning to blow up a missile silo thing is also a bit far-fetched. He seemingly grew up with them and knows them pretty well. I doubt there is much that goes on in that town that half the town doesn't know about before the day is out. And yet the writers expect us to believe that Deputy Dumbass would really see a Homeland Security bulletin and put 2 and 2 together and come up with 86? And when Flynn goes back into the Peripheral and discovers Ash has turned traitor, informing Flynn of the info in her brain, why doesn't Ash destroy the Peripheral as a means of giving her time to get Lev out of the way? Flynn now knows that Ash is a traitor. She can't afford to leave her with access to the future timeline, which means Burton and Connor's peripherals would have to go too. Not quite adding up there either. All of these people put on airs of being ruthless, and they can be ruthless, but there is a lack of consistency about it. And then we come back to the paradox. Or is that paradoxes? As the episode began to wind to a close, we have 2 scenes with Flynn and Connor in part of ruined London talking about how to reboot the stub. The first scene was just to establish she recruited him and got him to exclude Burton from the plan. The second one was to set up her apparent murder by sniper shot at the hands of Connor. And when he finally does shoot her, she appears to jump into her peripheral across from the inspector? How? If she is now dead in the past? Are they planning to somehow fake her death, or did he shoot her for real? And if he did, how is the show not dead with her? After all, the information everyone in the show is fighting over is probably now splattered over a country road in rural North Carolina. And why is her peripheral sitting in a square with the inspector with nobody else around? With the end scene, we finally meet some people who know what ruthlessness is and how it needs to be used. I don't know who the old men are, but their orders to Lev to kill all involved in his RI stub project is smart. I get the feeling that Lev will ignore them, but I like that they know what needs to be done when something seems to have failed in order to avoid the consequences of it coming to light and biting them in the ass. I hope Season 2 fleshes out that side of the world of the Peripheral. The Met and the RI seem fairly straightforward, but the oligarchs actually interest me. I know I've gone on longer than usual, but this was a season finale, and there were things that needed to be said in relation to what happened in this episode. Overall, this was about on par with Episode 7. Better, but not knocking my socks off. There are issues with the show, and they weigh it down unnecessarily. Characters that are bad distract from the script. Scripts that are bad distract from actors putting on good performances. There's a minimum of green screen overusage, which is appreciated in an era where studios seem to think that it is not real acting unless it is done on a soundstage in front of a green screen. What tech there is in the show is pretty well thought out and shown in the show, and there's an interesting storyline in there to be had if we can get the writers to work around characters that are not working, like Deputy Dumbass and the Inspector. I'm hoping that Season 2 is better, but I think I would probably be in line with the score Metacritic has it at. 50% from the critics and 6.2 from the users is probably about where I am in the middle. The Rotten Tomatoes scores are just silly, with 76% critics and 88% audience scores. There are way too many issues with this show to be anywhere near that high, and once again demonstrates that Rotten Tomatoes specifically, and critics in general, are broken and corrupt. There are way too many shills eating out of the trough of the studios who then return the favor by giving glowing reviews for messes. One look at the critics' score of The Last Jedi would tell you that. On that note, I will wrap this up. If you like what I do here, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, make sure that the bell icon is clicked on so you know when new videos are uploaded, share the video, and leave a comment or constructive criticism below. It really does help with Mama Susan's abomination, and I will see you in the next video. Tschüss.